I've been called a gentrifier hundreds of times since moving to Mexico. Apparently, according to YouTube comments, I packed up my family, crossed the international border, and somehow became the CEO of Mexican inflation, which is crazy because I still can't order tacos without accidentally ordering enough for 6 people. But after reading hundreds, maybe thousands of comments calling me a gentrifier, telling me to go home, telling me that I'm ruining Mexico, I just stopped arguing and I started wondering, what if they're right? Because here's the truth. My family didn't move to Mexico to get rich. We moved because we wanted a better life. Back in the United States, every year felt more and more expensive than the last. Housing, insurance, groceries, everything. And eventually, it felt like we were spending more time trying to afford life than actually living it. So we made one of the biggest decisions of our lives. We moved to Mexico. And according to the internet, that decision makes us part of the problem. So instead of making another opinion video, I decided to investigate this. Not to defend myself, not to prove myself wrong to strangers. I just wanted to figure out whether they had a point or not. And by the end of this video, we're going to answer 4 questions. What is gentrification really? Is it actually happening in Mexico? Are Americans really causing it? And after weeks of reading studies, government data, and way more academic papers than I ever wanted to, am I actually part of the problem? I thought this would take one afternoon, maybe. Instead, it completely changed how I think about housing in Mexico because the first thing that I discovered was that almost everyone, including me, was using the word gentrification wrong. Like most people, I assumed gentrification meant Americans moving to Mexico. It doesn't. The word was coined in 1964 by a British sociologist, Ruth Glass. Not in Mexico, not in America, in London. She noticed some wealthy people moving into working class neighborhoods. Old buildings were getting renovated, new coffee shops were being opened, property values climbed, rent climbed, and little by little, the people who had lived there the longest could not afford to stay. She called this process gentrification. And then I found the first thing that completely shattered my original theory. She wasn't talking about foreigners. She wasn't talking about immigration. She wasn't talking about Americans. She was talking about wealth replacing less wealth. That changes everything because if that's the definition, simply moving to another country doesn't automatically make somebody a gentrifier. But before we go any further, I want to know what you think. Do you think moving to another country automatically makes somebody a gentrifier? Or does it depend on what somebody does after they move? Don't overthink it. Just leave a comment before we keep going because I'm just curious to see if your opinion changes by the end of the video. So, is Mexico being gentrified? That's the question. The answer is yes, but not the way social media makes it sound. Researchers aren't talking about the entire country. They're talking about specific neighborhoods. Roma, Condesa, parts of Oaxaca, parts of Tulum, Playa del Carmen, San Miguel, places where housing demand increases faster than housing supply. That might sound like a tiny detail, but it's actually the difference between a headline and reality. Because online, people make it sound like all of Mexico is being taken over. So I asked what seemed like an obvious question. How many foreigners actually live in Mexico? Honestly, before doing the research, I would have guessed a lot. I mean, open up YouTube for 5 minutes and it feels like half of America has already moved there. Then I found the first statistic that made me literally stop reading and go, what? According to 2020 census from Mexico, about 1.2 million people living in Mexico were born from another country. But Mexico has about 126 million people. Do the math. Foreign-born residents make up about 1% of the entire country. 1%. I actually had to reread it because I thought I missed a 0 or something, but I didn't. It's really about 1%. And that's when I thought, then why does it feel like it's such a big problem? The answer to that question completely changed the rest of this investigation. because that 1% isn't spread across Mexico evenly. They're very concentrated in historic neighborhoods, beach towns, tourist destinations, places that people from all over the world and all over Mexico want to live. And that's where I found the first thing that nobody online was talking about. It wasn't Americans, it was Mexicans. When researchers looked at why cities like Merida have grown so quickly, they found something that surprised me. One of the biggest drivers wasn't international migration, it was internal migration. In other words, Mexicans moving to other parts of Mexico. Families leaving places like Mexico City, Veracruz, Campeche, Tabasco, looking for more safety, a slower pace of life, better opportunities. Does that sound familiar? Because that's almost the exact same reason why my family moved. And suddenly, this didn't feel like an American story anymore. It felt more like a human story. Because people go where they believe life will be better. Americans do it. Mexicans do it. Canadians do it. Everybody does it. So maybe the question isn't, why are Americans moving to Mexico? Maybe it's, why is everyone moving to the same places? Because once enough people want the same neighborhood, prices almost always go up. That's economics, not politics, but something still wasn't adding up. Even if demand increases, how did housing get so expensive? So I kept digging. And that's when I found one of the most important studies in this entire investigation. Researchers analyzed over 2 decades of housing prices in Mexico City. Not opinions, not social media, actual market data. And what they found honestly shocked me. Between the years 2000 and 2020, housing prices increased roughly 4 times. 4 times. Imagine your rent or your mortgage quadrupling. Now imagine your paycheck doesn't. That's exactly what happened to a lot of people. Researchers found that by 2015, the average family faced about 4 times greater difficulty accessing housing than families did just 10 years earlier. That statistic hit me because I know exactly what it feels like when life slowly gets more expensive. Not overnight, just a little more every year. Housing, food, insurance, utilities. You don't notice it at first. Then one day, you realize you're making more money than you used to, but somehow you're living worse. And that's where my family was. When we left the United States, we weren't the biggest fans, but we left because we wanted breathing room. More family time, less financial stress, a chance to actually enjoy life again. And then something happened that I would never expect. The internet told me that by trying to escape being priced out, I was helping price somebody else out. And I'll be honest, that messed with me because from my perspective, I'm just a husband, a dad, trying to build the best life that I can for my family. But from somebody else's perspective, maybe I'm another person adding pressure to the housing market. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Those two things can both be true. That's why this conversation is so difficult. So I want to ask you guys something. Forget the politics, forget social media. Just think about your family. If you couldn't afford to live where you grew up anymore, would you move somewhere else to build a better life, or would you just stay and suffer? There isn't really a right answer. I honestly want to know what you think. Leave a comment below because after that, I decided to test what might be the biggest claim of all. Are Americans actually driving Mexico's housing crisis? Or are we just the easiest people to blame? This is where the research took a turn that I wasn't expecting. Because when I looked at what economists, urban planners, and housing researchers were saying, almost nobody blamed just one thing. Instead, they kept pointing to the same list: housing shortages, luxury developments, tourism, short-term rentals like Airbnb, remote work after COVID, domestic migration, foreign investment, government policy, and yes, foreign buyers as well. Notice something? Nobody serious was saying this is the cause. They're saying these are the causes. So let me ask you something. If you had to blame one thing, what would it be? The government? Airbnb? Developers? Americans? Mexicans moving from other parts of the country? Or do you think it's impossible to blame just one thing? I honestly don't know the right answer, and that's why I wanted to hear yours. Makes sense, right? It kind of is like trying to figure out how traffic exists. Is it because of one car? No. It's because of thousands of people all wanting to use the same road at the same time. Housing markets work the same way. One family usually doesn't change a neighborhood. Thousands of families can. And that completely changed how I thought about this, because social media loves one villain. Reality usually doesn't have one. But then I got to the part of the research that I have been avoiding. The protests, because you've probably seen them.
Tonight, there are growing questions into a surge of youth-led protests taking place across major cities in Mexico.
Thousands of people marching through neighborhoods like Roma and Condesa in Mexico City, holding up signs that say housing is a human right. Other signs say, aquí se habla español. And some of the signs even said, gringo, stop stealing our home. I will admit it, the first time I saw those videos, they did bother me. Because if you're an American watching from home, it makes you feel like Mexico doesn't want Americans there. But then I asked myself something. Has that been my experience? And honestly, it hasn't. Not even close. I've been living in Mexico for months. I've gone grocery shopping, taken Ubers, eaten at local restaurants, walked through neighborhoods, and I've talked with neighbors, I've talked with police officers, I've talked with cashiers, I've talked with parents, construction workers. I have never, not once, had somebody tell me to leave because I'm American.
Do me a favor, please. Get out of here. Get out of here, man. Shit, I'm saying.
Actually, most people have been incredibly kind. Sometimes they hear me trying to speak Spanish, they smile, and they help me finish my sentence.
Señor, tú sabes si voy para allá o si me da el tiempo para caminar? Sorry?
Sometimes they want to practice English. Sometimes both of us butcher each other's language, and somehow we still understand each other. It's honestly one of my favorite parts about living here. So that created another mystery. If real life has become so welcoming, why does the internet feel so hostile? Then it finally clicked. Maybe the people protesting aren't protesting Americans, maybe they're protesting being priced out of their own communities. Those are two different things. Imagine your grandparents bought a house somewhere. Your parents grew up there. You grew up there. Every birthday, every holiday, every childhood memory happened on those streets. Now, imagine your own kids can't afford to live there anymore. I'd be frustrated too, and most people would. And then I found a quote that I think explains this better than anybody could. One local activist said, quote, "Gentrification isn't just foreigners' fault. It's the fault of governments and companies that prioritize the money foreigners bring." End quote. Read that once more, folks. Even some of the people leading this conversation are not blaming the foreigners. They're blaming the system. That completely changed how I viewed the protests, because if governments encourage tourism, if cities approve luxury developments, if housing supplies can't keep up with demand, if investors keep buying property, Is it fair to point at one family and say, you're the problem? I honestly don't know. But then I found one last statistic that made me stop all over again. According to the 2020 Mexican census, the entire state of the Yucatan had only 8,500 foreign-born residents. Roughly half of them were Americans. Think about that. A state with more than 2 million people and only 8,500 foreign-born residents live there. That doesn't sound like enough people to completely transform an entire state, but it could absolutely have an impact in specific neighborhoods. And that's the difference almost nobody talks about. The internet wants black and white answers, always. The data keeps giving me shades of gray. That's when I realized I wasn't trying to figure out if Americans were the problem anymore. I was trying to figure out why everyone wanted one simple answer to such a complicated question. When I started this investigation, I wanted a verdict. I wanted to know, am I a gentrifier? I figured by the end of this video, I'd have a yes or a no. Instead, I ended up with something that I wasn't expecting. I don't think this story is really about Americans. I don't even think that this is really about Mexico. I think it's about housing, because the more I research, the more I realize this exact conversation is happening all over the world. In the United States, in Canada, Portugal, Spain, the United Kingdom, Australia, all different countries, all different languages, the same basic problem. More people want to live in desirable places, but housing isn't keeping up. Governments make policy, developers build what's most profitable, investors buy property, tourism grows, remote work changes where people choose to live, and every one of those things adds pressure. And then something hit me. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question this entire time. Instead of asking who ruined the housing market, maybe we should be asking, why are so many housing markets breaking at the same time? Because that's a completely different conversation. Could Americans moving into one neighborhood increase the demand? Absolutely. And the research says they can. Could wealthy newcomers, whether they're American, Canadian, or Mexican, push prices higher in certain areas of the world? Absolutely. The research says they can. But did I find evidence that Americans by themselves are causing Mexico housing crisis? No, I couldn't honestly say that, because every serious study kept pointing back to the much bigger picture. Housing shortages, domestic migration, tourism, government policy, luxury development, foreign investment, remote work. It's not one wave, it's a bunch of waves crashing into each other. And I think that that's why this conversation gets so heated, because it's personal. If your rent doubles, you don't care about economic theory. You care that you might have to leave your neighborhood. If you can't afford to buy a home where you grew up, you don't care about supply curves. You care that your kids might grow up somewhere else. Those feelings are real, and I don't think they should be dismissed. But I also don't think it's fair to look at one family trying to build a better life and make them the face of a problem that's been building for decades. Because if I'm being honest, my family isn't very different from the families I researched. We're all trying to do the same thing. Find a safe place, find opportunity, build a future, take care of the people that we love. And whether you're from Mexico, the United States, or anywhere else, that's pretty human of a goal. So after weeks of reading studies, looking at census data, and digging through housing reports, I'm trying to prove myself wrong. Here's my answer. No. I don't believe moving to Mexico automatically makes somebody a gentrifier. I think how you live, how you contribute, and the larger economic forces around you matter far more than the country printed on your passport. Ironically, the biggest thing this investigation changed wasn't my opinion about Mexico. It was my opinion about the internet. because the internet gave me a villain. The research gave me a system, and those two things are very different. So maybe the next time someone says you're ruining Mexico, instead of arguing, I'll probably ask them a question. Compared to what? Because after everything I've learned, the answer is never as simple as a comment section can make it seem. Now, it's your turn again, guys. After everything you've seen, after everything we've talked about, do you think that I'm a gentrifier? Yes or no? Or do you think that it's more complicated than that? I'm going to be reading the comments because I genuinely am interested in where you landed after watching all of this. If you enjoy documentaries that challenge assumptions instead of repeating the headlines that you hear every day, I think you should subscribe. Every week, I'm uncovering another part of life in Mexico that most Americans never think about. And the deeper that I dig, the more surprises I find. And if something like that sounds like you might enjoy it, you might should come along for the journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
Life in